Hi, if you don't already know me, I'm Dr. Ken Brousseau. I'm Chief Executive of Decision Dynamics, LLC, and I'm one of the developers of the StyleView assessment system, and that's the topic I'm going to talk about in this video today. The centerpiece of this insight program is the StyleView conceptual model, and it's all about how we make decisions and how we think our way through problems and we make choices. But I'm here to tell you the practical importance of this goes far beyond mere decision making. It influences our relationships, work, our career, and our feelings and motivations in a wide range of circumstances. In this particular video, I'll give you an overview of the StyleView model and the 4 basic decision styles that are included in the model, as well as the conceptual foundations of the model itself. Along the way, I'll indicate why this is something that you should care about. In later videos in this series, I'll give you deeper dives into the nooks and crannies of this fascinating realm of human experience. You'll see the far-reaching impact of our styles of thinking and deciding. So let's listen in as I describe the model. First and foremost, I want you to understand that the styles we're talking about are behaviors that take place whenever people are dealing with other people in situations that involve making decisions, making presentations, or formulating plans, and they're aware of the eyes of other people being upon them. And also, when one is perhaps by oneself or with just a few very familiar other people and is solving a problem, making a decision, or making a choice. I'll have more to say about those 2 different kinds of circumstances later on. So, to be specific, just what are styles of thinking and deciding? Decision styles, as I call them for short, are simply habits of thinking and information processing that people pick up over time. These habits or styles are formed through experience. First, our thinking is influenced by socialization. We learn our styles from others. Our parents or primary caregivers tend to have the earliest and perhaps the biggest impact on our styles of thinking and deciding. Later on, it's teachers, friends, bosses, co-workers that continue to influence how we think. These influences can be quite subtle. Neither we nor our teachers are necessarily aware that this is happening. Meanwhile, in addition to socialization, we go to work, and there on a daily basis, we're exposed to the ebb and flow of complexities, time pressures, risks, and uncertainties. And all these influences shape our thinking over time. We are mostly unaware of how our circumstances are influencing us. In fact, we may feel that our thinking is just the most natural thing if we ever reflect on this at all. Now, it's implicit in what I just said that the styles we're going to talk about can and do change. They aren't fixed. How you think and decide now might be quite different from how you tended to think and decide in the past, and likewise, how you will think and decide in the future. I'm not talking about instantaneous change in the moment, but instead a more gradual process that takes place over time, again, based on experience. In addition, I want you to understand that decision styles are not about intelligence. They're not about how smart anyone is. Instead, this is all about how one uses whatever intelligence one happens to have. Moreover, no one of the styles is good nor bad in any absolute sense. A particular style is a good thing or a bad thing or somewhere in between, only in the context of the situation in which it's used. This is all about situational fit. Okay, so now we know that decision styles are simply learned habits of thinking that are formed through experience. We also know that styles can change over the course of time, also based upon experience. And although we're talking about thinking, we're not talking about how smart anyone is. We're simply talking about how people use whatever intelligence they happen to have. We also know that the styles are neither right nor wrong apart from the situations in which they're used. Now we need to know a little bit more about the styles themselves. Are they similar or are they different? What are their underpinnings? In this next section, I talk about two fundamental foundation factors on which the styles are based. If you can remember those two simple factors, you can always recall the four basic styles that are based upon those factors. So let's listen in. The underpinnings of this particular model of styles of thinking and deciding revolves around two simple foundation factors. One is simply how much information is taken into account and considered in the process of making a decision. A little, a lot, or something in between those extremes. People vary greatly in the amount of information they take into account when making decisions. Secondly, focus. Here I'm talking about the extent to which a person zeroes in on one clear-cut solution or course of action to achieve a very specific objective, versus identifying multiple solutions or possible courses of action needed to achieve multiple objectives, not just one. These two foundation factors, information use and focus, are a very important part of this model of thinking and deciding. I want to dig into this matter of information use in more detail. And as I do, I want you to imagine yourself in a situation in which you need to make a decision. Let's say you need to decide on which of two paths to go down. Maybe you need to choose between two different schools to attend, and both have made you offers. Or maybe your education is well behind you and you need to choose between two employment possibilities that have just popped up. In either case, suppose that you're not familiar with the choices that are open to you. They're new and they're outside your past experience. So in this graph here, you're down at the lower left side, the low point. That is, your level of understanding needed to make the choices is low. And at this point, you have very little information to increase your knowledge and understanding of the choices. So to make a good choice, you have to go out and get more information. In other words, you have to climb a learning curve like this. Now, I want to direct your attention to a feature of the curve that's a characteristic of many learning curves. Notice that at its origin, where you start out, the curve goes upward rather steeply. That is, each piece of information you take in takes you up quite a way on the vertical axis, your level of understanding. But as time goes by and you take in more and more information, the curve starts to level off. Each piece of new information isn't increasing your understanding as much as when you started off. Now, this is where styles of thinking and deciding come into play. Some of us tend to stop our intake of information and our trip up the curve right about here. I call it the good enough point. They know that there's more information available and that they'd learn more from it, but they feel they have a good enough understanding of the situation and the issue to make a good decision. I call this the satisficer mode. One is satisfied that enough is known to make a good decision. And I contrast that with the other extreme, the maximizer mode, in which a person maximizes intake of information until he or she feels that nothing really new is being learned. These are two extremes, and in fact, people's information use can be found spread out all along the curve from the satisficers to the maximizers. Now, keep in mind that neither of these two modes is superior to the other in any absolute sense. Whether one is better than the other depends on the situation a person faces. If there's a short fuse burning and time is of the essence, and especially if the situation itself is rather simple, then the satisficer mode likely has an advantage. But if there's no short fuse burning and the situation is complicated with lots of moving parts and the outcomes of any decision are really important, then the maximizer mode likely has the advantage. Now, I want to turn our attention to the other foundation factor in decision styles, solution focus. There are those of us who will take in information when facing a decision. It could be a little or a lot, and use it to generate a solution, a very clear-cut and focused solution or course of action aimed at achieving a very specific outcome, as I show here. I call this mode the uni-focused mode of thinking. Uni-focused thinkers tend to concentrate on one issue or outcome at a time. Now, a uni-focused decider might be working with another person who will take the same information and use it to the same extent as the uni-focused thinker, but instead of a single solution, we'll come up with something like this. There are multiple solutions, or at least multiple courses of action that the person will see is needed to accomplish multiple objectives, not just one. In a sense, these thinkers always see multiple issues that are relevant and multiple outcomes that are important. I call this mode of thinking the multi-focused mode. These are two dramatically different ways of thinking, uni-focused versus multi-focused. And they have a major impact on how people get along and how they go about performing tasks and making plans. So I can assure you that from the uni-focused perspective, this multi-focused plan is no plan at all. It's a god-awful scatterbrained mess, especially when the multi-focused thinker insists that all these multiple actions must be taken. But likewise, to the multi-focused thinker, this uni-focused plan is very deficient and exceedingly narrow. Maybe it's a good start, but what about A? What about B? What about this? And what about that? Basically, these two thinkers cannot even agree on what a decision looks like. These differences can lead to arguments, stress, and outright conflict. Here again, though, in a bigger picture, neither mode is absolutely better than the other, no matter how strongly people feel that their way of thinking is the better way. The situation has to be taken into account. If the situation's very familiar and very stable, not much change happening, then the uni-focused mode will likely have an advantage. But if the situation is new and changing or dynamic with a lot of parts, and the only thing known for sure is that whatever exists today will be different tomorrow, the multi-focus mode likely has the advantage. All right, now that we've had a look at the foundations of the StyleView model, we can talk about some very specific ways of thinking, very specific styles. We take the fast-acting, satisficing styles and we put them here. We take the more analytic, maximizing styles and we put them over here. On the vertical axis, we take the uni-focused styles and put them on top. And we put the multi-focus styles on the bottom. Now we can identify 4 fundamentally different styles. Up here in the top left corner, we have a satisficing uni-focused style. We call that style decisive. It's quick to decide, focusing on a particular course of action and then sticking to that course of action until a very specific outcome has been achieved. There's no looking back. You put things behind you and you move forward. However, there's another satisficing style, but this one is multi-focused and we call it flexible. Like its decisive counterpart, it reaches decisions quickly, but just as quickly, it can change direction and move off on a different course of action. It makes no sense to stick to just one course of action when you see yourself in a dynamic, changing world. 2 very different worldviews. On the maximizing side of things, there's a style we call hierarchic. It's analytic and it's uni-focused, aimed at studying things carefully and then choosing the best course of action and sticking with it. The hierarchic style tends to involve a long-range strategic way of thinking. Once you decide on a course of action, you stay that course because it's the right thing to do. Also on the maximizing side of things, there's another style, and this one is multi-focused. We call it integrative. Like its hierarchic counterpart, it's analytic, but like its flexible cousin, it's multi-focused. So the perspective is broad and dynamic. It's not just focused on one thing or one outcome, Integrative thinkers tend to come up with broad plans that contain lots of possibilities, possibilities that can change as things change. Consequently, integrative plans themselves are like living organisms that have a lot of moving parts that require modification and tinkering to deal with new developments as they arise. Okay, now you know what I'm talking about when I mention the different styles. But there's much more to this matter of decision styles than we've covered so far. This has been just a brief introduction to what 4 basic styles are. I'll give you a much richer picture of each of the styles and what their potential strong points are and their potential weak points. I've mentioned repeatedly that the effectiveness of styles depends on the situation in which they're used. So what are the telltale signs that a particular situation would fit one style better than another? I've also mentioned that styles are simply habits of thinking, and those habits can often be unconscious. But you can learn to take more control and be more aware of your styles of thinking and use that learning to navigate your way through different kinds of situations and adapt the style that's needed for each of those situations. There are ways to do this. Another matter that I'm going to delve into in more detail is this difference between how we behave in public interpersonal situations with a lot of other eyes upon us, as opposed to how we think and behave when we're by ourselves or we're with just some very familiar other people and we're thinking our way through issues and making decisions. If you've done or you will do the StyleView assessment, then you'll get a detailed picture of your public interpersonal role style, as I call it, versus your private operating style. And the comparison between the two is usually really eye-opening and packed with potential insights that you can use. So stay tuned and continue your journey towards self-discovery.